Do vintage sewing patterns make you swoon, but you're scared to actually try sewing with them? In this episode, vintage pattern obsessive and YouTube queen Stephanie Canada unpacks the perceived obstacles that may be holding you back. Stephanie and I also discuss how to enjoy vintage style without perpetuating vintage values. Plus, how using vintage resources might help us to sew more sustainably. So stick around a couple of minutes for that. Welcome to Check Your Thread, the podcast that will help you sew more sustainably. My name's Zoe and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 15 years and I'm the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge Me Made May. But, like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and I'm looking at the way that my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me in this journey. Hi lovely listener, how are you doing? You must forgive my lower than usual energy today. I've been up for literally most of the night with a poorly little boy, but he seems to be doing okay at the moment. I'm kind of out of practice of having a disturbed night. Anyway, what are you making at the moment? Something exciting? I've actually got 2 projects on the go at the moment, which isn't normally something that I do. One of them is the project that I mentioned in last week's episode. It's a pinafore that I'm making out of some leopard print stretch twill that I bought in New York on our honeymoon back in 2012. That's been put on pause because I've run out of black top stitching thread and I'm waiting till I'm back at my fabric shop job to pick up some more. The other project is a backpack that I'm hoping will be fairly waterproof. I'm so sick of the contents of my bag getting soaked when I have to take the kids to and from school in the rain. I've got a remnant of vinyl tablecloth stuff that I'm trying to use, and I bought the Making Backpack pattern by Noodlehead, plus a zip and some webbing. And I'm able to buy those now because I'm not doing the Last Sew is Standing challenge at the moment. I still need a couple of bits of hardware, but I've made a start and it's looking cute. Okay, here's a win that I recently had. I think it's an oblique rather than direct sustainability win, but it is about helping me share ideas and resources related to sewing more sustainably. I finally migrated the Check Your Thread mailing list to a new newsletter platform. The free platform that I was using wasn't doing a very good job. Often the weekly newsletters would end up in people's spam folders. I even found them in my own spam folders sometimes. And a couple of would-be subscribers contacted me to let me know that despite repeated attempts to sign up, they still weren't able to receive it for some reason, not even into their spam folder. As you might have ascertained by now, I'm not great with technology, but I put my big girl pants on, I researched my options for other grown-up paid-for platforms, I picked one, moved it all over, and I've worked out how to use it. So now, if you're subscribed, you're getting the weekly newsletter delivered by MailerLite, and it seems to be working much, much better. And I even figured out how to send out a nice little welcome message to new subscribers that goes out automatically. So if you aren't signed up yet and do want to receive the free weekly Check Your Thread newsletter, and honestly you'd be a fool not to, please go to the homepage at checkyourthread.com, scroll to the bottom and sign up. I haven't set up a pop-up sign-up box thing because I find those things really annoying. So instead you'll need to scroll to the bottom of the homepage and put your email in. The newsletters are always short but sweet and will probably take about 2 minutes to read. They always include just 2 things. A little reminder about the topic of that week's episode, often including a little additional insight, and one other thing that I think you'll be interested in. That might be a cool free sewing resource that I think you'll enjoy, or letting you know about a newly released zero-waste sewing pattern, or a brilliant podcast episode I heard, or I might ask you to contribute to a future episode, or something else. So yeah, I make it each week specifically for you podcast listeners, so please sign up. Right, sustainability fails. Honestly, after a night of virtually no sleep, I'm kind of running on fumes, so I'm going to spare myself sustainability fail this week. Instead, I'm going to thank new patrons Peggy, Leah and Sarah for signing up to support the podcast this week, and say thanks to existing patron Jill for upping the amount of her monthly contribution. Thank you, epic people! To be honest, I'm still some way off the amount I need to be bringing in to support my family whilst making this podcast. But I'm getting there, and I'm very grateful to everyone past and present who has given financial support. If you feel you wouldn't miss the price of a cup of coffee each month, or more or less, the amount is entirely up to you, please find the link to join the Check Your Thread Patreon community in the show notes, via the podcast app on your phone right now, or via the website checkyourthread.com. Okay, on to today's super fun and interesting episode. So I have lovely listener and podcast patron Janine to thank for hooking me up with both the idea and the guest contact for this week's episode. So Janine is a massive vintage sewing fan and raised the interesting discussion point of how using vintage sewing resources might help us to sew more sustainably. Being in that whole scene, Janine was also able to suggest to me some people to contact to talk to. And as soon as I saw a couple of reels made by Stephanie Canada from Backroom Finds, I knew I had to speak to her. Stephanie is not only super knowledgeable and experienced in this area of sewing, but she also has such a fun personality and isn't afraid to share her hot takes on some of the more controversial topics related to vintage sewing. Stephanie was very generous with her time and we talked for ages. It was all gold, so I've decided to split our conversation into 2 episodes so you don't miss out on any of the good stuff. In this episode, we discuss vintage sewing more broadly and shed some light on what might be holding you back from using vintage sewing patterns. Next week, we get a fascinating peek into her business, Backroom Finds, and Stephanie talks about how she sources her stock, and we get into why you absolutely should cut into precious fabric, and, curiously, when it's necessary to bin vintage sewing resources. So enjoy this week's episode, then get excited for next week's. So until then, take care of yourself and everyone around you and those further afield. Sign up to my snazzy updated newsletter and enjoy! So, hi Stephanie, massive thanks to you for giving me some of your morning today. You're going to clue me in on vintage sewing, which is a really interesting angle on sewing more sustainably. So could you please tell us who you are, where you are, and what fills your days?
Sure. My name is Stephanie Canada, and I currently live in Orlando, Florida. And what fills my days is, at this point, an utteral army of vintage sewing fabric.
Wow.
Literal hoard of fabric in my garage that was a hoard of someone else, and now is my job to find it new homes.
I saw on your Instagram, like, a literal truck of fabric.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct.
Okay. Well, we're going to get on to how you source your stuff in a bit, so I'd love to hear more about that. But yeah, so I really want to hear about how you got into sewing. Like, what came first? Like, a love of sewing, a love of vintage, or if they've always gone hand in hand?
They have not always gone hand in hand. I started my journey with sewing by sitting on the floor of my mother's sewing room from the time that I could breathe. I want to say probably until I left for college. So I would just hang out with her in her sewing room. I wouldn't necessarily be sewing all the time. I did take on a few projects that I tried. At one point, I did sew, and by I mean me with my mother's help. All of the costumes, we were doing a show that had like a trio of gals, and they all needed to match, and they all needed to be slightly 50s. And of course, like, this is high school, so the bar is in hell. It's fine. Whatever happens on those girls, as long as they look good, is fine. But my mother and I took on the task of making them, and they were made out of like red sequined lame.
Woo!
I can't even begin to describe how out of the water I was on that project.
And you still sew, like, despite that being an early project.
Yes, I do. Not really sure why. No, I know why. It's because it's really fun. So, like, I would say it started with just sewing, and then, unfortunately, after my mother passed away back in 2011, I was trying to find a way to, like, reconnect with her.
Yeah.
And, I was in an antique store, and in the very back was this little hat box full of 60s patterns. None of them had ever been used, and they all looked very lonely and sad. And so, because I also, child of the millennial age, has a phone, and at the time Etsy was just really starting to, like, hit its prime back in the day, I was like, you know what? Let's look on Etsy and let's see, because I was trying to find a way to, like, invest my money, but the idea of a stock market made me want to, like, claw my eyeballs out and die on the inside. So I was like, what if I invest my money in old sewing patterns and find them new homes? And then I'll make a little bit of money off of it, so that way Mom gets what she wanted. She wanted me to not blow it all. And I get to, play with vintage patterns, which are really cool. And when I remembered, I looked the first one up, and it was unfolded, and they were selling it for $1 at the antique store, and it was $15 online. Oh. And I was like, oh.
That's a nice profit.
That's a lovely little return on our income there. And thus began a problem.
So had you kind of been involved in vintage patterns before that hat box, or was that
No.
the first thing?
That was the first time. Like, my mother had sewn from what kids call the vintage now. So, like, my mom had sewn from the 80s and 90s patterns to make clothes for me forever. But no, she hated her old styles. She got rid of all of her old patterns. The only thing I have left to prove that she sewed in the 70s and 60s are the photographs. And I have 2 dresses that she had at some point also cut up for like a quilt or something. So, like, there's like big chunks missing from them. That's all I have to prove that she sewed. So no, that was what started the vintage right then and there.
Wow, it was that discovery. Amazing. And then you were in. You're like, yes.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'd always kind of loved like the reproduction 50s stuff. Reproduction 40s, 50s, and 60s has kind of always been like the stuff I like to wear.
Yeah.
But that was the point that I was like, oh, there are patterns for this too. Of course there are, Stephanie. So yeah, that's sort of where the vintage pattern and how we ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sewing pattern cabinets downstairs currently.
Oh, and that's your personal stash?
No, that is all stock actually.
Okay.
My personal stash, I am very strict with myself.
Oh, okay.
I am allowed in my personal stash, if I get a box of patterns in to sell, I am allowed to keep 1. That's it. I am allowed 1 singular pattern.
Okay. So I have a direct question about this from lovely Check Your Third patron Janine Spendlove. She wanted to know how you manage to keep your own collection in check when you're constantly bringing in new amazing patterns and fabrics. So that's your rule. At what point did you instigate that rule?
Oh, goodness. It wasn't all the time, because originally when I was finding boxes, I wasn't keeping much at all.
Okay.
Like, there are patterns that I sold for very cheap that I'm like, dang it, I wish I would have kept that.
Is that because you've since grown to enjoy that style?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And also, I realized I sold it to a reseller, so now I see her reproduction pattern from my original, so it's a constant reminder. I was like, oh man, I should have traced the hat before I sent it at least. I implemented the rule. I think when I got the very first sewing pattern cabinet, I would used to travel around the country doing opera stage management, totally different. And I would keep 3 tote bins in the back of my car at all times. And that was not only my stock, but that was also my shipping supplies and my, sleeves if I found more. I was it was wild.
So that was your business in the back of your car, basically?
Correct.
Oh,
my business was in the back of my car for the first, I want to say, until I had my daughter in 2014. So that was about 3 years.
Wow. Micro business.
Yeah. So it was a relatively portable business. When we moved into this house, I found my first sewing pattern cabinet while I was in this house. I was like, okay, this is the sign. This is it. It's time.
We're bringing this indoors.
Yeah. 1, we're bringing it indoors. 2, we're not going to live out of tote bins anymore. And 3, you can't keep them all. So that's when I started my 1 per box rule. Now, do I occasionally break it? Of course I do, because I'm human. But then there are also some boxes where I don't keep any because nothing excites me.
Yeah, or maybe it's things you've already got.
Right. So it's been an interesting balance to find that.
I love that. So good. So what is it about vintage patterns and materials that you love so much?
It really is that you can't find the quality like that. It's not even that our modern day processes are bad, or I'm not here to say like quilting cottons are bad. Of course not. I make dresses out of quilting cottons all the time. Why? Because they're cute freaking prints. But what I love about them is I love the way the patterns fit the body, and I love the way the fabrics drape and yet are still easy to sew because they were designed to be apparel fashion and not laden down with plastic. Now, are some of them, do they have? Yes. We are not perfect, but as long as it's not in a landfill, I feel like that's a win. Now, unfortunately, while the quality is normally far superior, even just for standard cottons, like you can sew, I've got multiple dresses out of vintage cottons, perfectly fine. There is one dress, though, unfortunately, that is starting to show her age already.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it's because it's a gray and black fabric, and usually the gray and black fabrics tend to, because of the heavy dye load I find sometimes, they tend to deteriorate faster. And it's a black and gray. It's already, like, it's got some holes on the pockets. Like, I've already had to fix a couple tears, but I'm like, nope, I will run this thing into the ground. It's fine.
I remember I made a skirt, oh God, it would have been about 14 years ago now, but I made this really cute skirt out of I'm guessing 50s curtain. I loved it so much. It was this big cabbagey roses. I adored it. And it was such a really unusual colour combo. So it was like a navy background and it was almost like lime green roses. It was stunning. And I think it just, the fabric must have perished and I didn't realise, and it just went like,
yeah.
After like 2 wears, it was just like, and it was so dramatic. Like this tear was so dramatic. I'm like,
oh no.
We're not going back from this. Like there was no way to. Yeah. It was just a lesson learned.
Yeah, I have a piece that I still like stare at longingly because I know it's dry rotted. But I'm like, you would have made such cute things, but I can't throw you out.
So, but to go back a little bit, do you define yourself as like a vintage sewer or sewist?
Yes, vintage sewist is what that is me. That is me. Absolutely.
Right.
Either that or chaos sewist. Those are your choices.
Tell me about your sewing practice. So are you exclusively sewing with vintage patterns? You said that you do also sew with like some quilting cotton, so you're clearly not only sewing with vintage fabric.
Right. No, I absolutely use modern fabric a lot because, as much as I love a good vintage cotton, there is no good vintage cotton Back to the Future print. Sorry, like that's a quilting cotton. But I will say, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think I primarily do vintage or vintage reproductions from the people that I know and trust. Mm-hmm. Like Mrs. Depew, Wearing History, people like that.
Right.
So it's just because I like the lines better. And if I'm doing a reproduction, it's because I trust that maker to have gone through that pattern, made sure the lines are correct to the pattern. Like, that's the thing that people don't get. They make patterns from antique patterns. So, like, they make 1910s, 1920s. And they're like, I don't think people get it. These patterns weren't perfect to begin with.
Right.
Because the patterns are normally not great. Because they expected the home sewist to start with this blank canvas and then use their institutional knowledge to make it better. We don't have that anymore. So, like... Because, like, the same way, like, I've made the black and gray dress I was just talking about. I traced it off of the original pattern, and I went through and I traced it line for line. I did all the notches. There was 2 notches straight up not on there, and that facing was a lie. So, like, the pattern itself was wrong. Okay. Did I still make the dress? Absolutely. Does it look good? I think so. And am I happy with it? Yeah. Like, so, like, at the end of the day, it's still fine, but, like, we lambast modern pattern makers because, they like to take shortcuts. Their tissue is crap, all of these things. But at the same time, like, while I like the lines of the vintage patterns better, I already know going into it, there's probably going to be something wrong with this bad boy too. So, like, it's not a perfect scenario.
So do you think that generally sewers back in the day, they already had a bigger bank of knowledge through, I don't know, whatever education that they had than we generally have today, and we're kind of expecting more from patterns today?
I do. And it's not necessarily even a fault of the educational system at this point. Like, yeah, sure, there were home ec classes that did teach them some, but a lot of it was just doing what I did when I was growing up. You sit in your mother's sewing room, and you learn to sew from her, or from your grandmother, or from your aunt. So
there's not that generational link for a lot of people
correct.
now.
It's the generational knowledge that we're lacking.
Yeah.
And yes, and the lack of home ec classes to teach any type of skills like that are also woefully gone. I don't know. Do you guys still have those in England where they still teach home ec?
I think in some schools, my husband's a teacher at a secondary school, and I know that they have an after-school sewing club, but I don't think they teach it as in the curriculum. Yeah, I know they do cooking, but they don't do sewing. I don't think. I could be
Interesting.
wrong.
Yeah. Because I know they removed a lot of those from American school too. There has been a small push in some places to get it back, but I'm like, my daughter will learn by sitting in my sewing room the same way I learned by sitting in my mother's sewing room. Will she be perfect at it? Probably not. Will she want to do it? I have no idea. And the thing is, I don't care, because as long as she's in there and she's having fun, She's doing what I did growing up. Like, yeah, I didn't really want to learn from my mom, but I would sit there and play with those little melty beads where you like made things. Like, that's what I wanted to do. So I was just happy to be in the room with her and have her just be around. And then I would hear her talk about the patterns and see how she was doing it. And she would show me. It doesn't mean it's stuck, but like she was trying.
But it's kind of normalizing it, isn't it? And a lot of
Yes.
people don't have that, and a lot of kids don't have that.
Exactly. And that's I think what we're really missing. And that there's no fault here. Like, that's the thing. Like, I don't ever want people to feel bad.
No.
Like, oh, I'm a mom, I don't have time to teach my kid this. Oh, I'm a dad, I don't have time to teach my son how to sew. Like, I don't ever want people to feel bad about it. It's the year of our Lord 2023, and capitalism is it, baby. Like, we know
Absolutely.
this, and that's unfortunate. It's an unfortunate reality. And we also know that the cost of living, not only in your country, but in mine, is absolutely astronomical.
Absolutely. And if it's a two adult family, both those adults have to be going out to work these days. It's not
Absolutely.
a situation where one can go out to work, the other can stay home, bake amazing things, and teach their kids to sew. Like, that's not a reality now.
It's not. And that is what is wrong. That's what's wrong. The institutions that keep us in go, 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 and don't allow just the general masses to stop and have a friggin' hobby.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know about you, when I'm sewing now, my kids have gone to bed because that is the only little scrap of time I've got. So they're not witnessing as much sewing as I'm doing, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, my daughter's normally in bed, long asleep by the time I'm like, all right, let's try and get another couple pieces done.
Exactly, let's get a seam in.
Right? How many seams can I get in before I fall asleep on the sewing machine? Don't do that, kids. Don't do that. Go to bed like a normal human being.
Yeah. So tell me, are you using vintage equipment and vintage machines? Does it go there?
Well, it started there because, honestly, my mother had a Bernina Artista 730, which is a computerized machine, which I remember when she bought it, she was over the moon.
Oh.
Over the moon for this machine. She paid so much money for this machine. She was so happy with it. It scared the tar out of me. Because I was like, wait, whoa. Now we're putting computers in sewing machines now? I don't know how I feel about that. And that led me to initially start sewing off of a $30 machine that I got at an estate sale that I then took apart, oiled, and attempted to make it move. And it worked. It worked for quite some time. Did I break it? Yes. Have I gotten it fixed? No. Is it fixable? Yes, because it's an all-metal machine. I just haven't done the thing. Mm-hmm. So when the machine broke, I had two options at that point. I was like, well, Stephanie, you can drive your happy butt all the way up, to Mount Dora, which is an hour and a half away, depending on traffic, and have the nice man fix it for you. Or you can bust out your mother's perfectly fine machine that she did show you how to use before she moved on from this earthly coil, and you can use that. And I will say, as much as I loved my little 60s, 70s pink case machine, Mom's machine is really nice.
Well, if it was right there.
It was literally waiting for me to not be scared of it anymore. Now, do I know all the buttons? No, of course not. I know the bare minimum of how to get the job done, and I did figure out the automatic buttonholer because that was lovely. But like
that is next level, isn't it?
But I'm still stressed the whole time. I'm like, don't screw it up, don't screw it up, don't screw it up, don't screw it up.
Yeah,
like,
it's terrifying.
Yeah. Because then you start second guessing yourself. Did I fill the bobbin? I think I filled the bobbin. Oh my God, what if I didn't? It's going to stop halfway through. This is going to look terrible. Like, all the litany of things.
Yeah,
it's amazing what happens. One time you do hand buttonholes, you're like, nope, I'm done with this crap.
Yeah. Never. So that's something I want to come back to, actually. So in terms of vintage sewing, like in terms of like the kind of scene or the community, like, is there a lot of kind of like sharing of resources and sources? And I was also wondering if there are kind of like sub-communities within it, because it sounds to me like you have a deep passion and love for vintage styles, but you're not like this kind of purist.
Oh, no, yeah.
But I'm imagining there are, because
there are.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast episode with Gertie, from Gertie from, was it Gertie's blog for Better Sewing and Charm Patterns? And she was saying that sometimes she receives negative feedback on the fact that she's got tattoos. And some people seem to think that kind of like spoils the vintage look, like it's some kind of illusion,
Yeah. There are different camps, but here is my take on those camps.
I want your hot take.
This is absolutely a hot take. The first step is that one of the camps is, I lived through it the first time. Why aren't you doing it my way?
Oh, interesting.
I get a lot of that. I don't know. Let me rephrase. I don't get a lot of that. I do get those comments on my YouTube channel.
So are these boomers who have been there first time?
Yeah. Even on my scale of ages, like, I think I might have some slightly, like, what was the one? Silent generation?
Wow.
Because you can see the age range of your audience. And because I deal with vintage patterns a lot and not always like fun vintage sewing, I tend to draw the older crowd, which I love them. Most of them are like 99.95% of them are absolutely fantastic human beings and are completely open to whatever comes out of my mouth.
Well, they kind of have to be if they're listening to your channel.
That's true. But not always. Sometimes people hate watch. You don't always know. And, like, listen, you want to hate watch? Go for it, baby. Thank you for that lovely, lovely view.
Exactly.
Mama appreciates the AdSense. Like, come on now. So you have that group. And then you have well, that's not how my mom did it, which is, still some boomers, if they were the younger set of boomers, and some Gen Xers. And then there's the group of, like, absolute purists.
Right.
I'm talking cream of the crop, like, even beyond the people who were like, well, I was there the first time. These are the people that, like, they live in the 50s house, they own the 50s gear, and I know this group exists because I've had the pleasure to chat a little bit with Lacey Faye, also on YouTube. She doesn't do as much sewing, but she's very vintage. She lives in a 50s house, but she is not a purist. She has a phone. She has a modern television. Like, she has these things. I don't know if she has a modern television, but she definitely, like, she has a phone. She is still a modern person. She's on the
internet.
Yeah, exactly. Like, she's on the internet. If you were a purist, you wouldn't be on the internet. But she says that she gets these comments from these people that are just like, well, if you were a real 50s housewife, you wouldn't have a phone. And it's like, bro, 2023 much? Like, come on.
Well, what are they doing? They're clearly contacting her.
Exactly. I'm like, what are you using?
I'm sure they didn't go knock on her door going,
well, it's because there's people that want it to be the ideal, right? So they want the ideal. And those are the people that tend to, like, if I'm going to block a comment, it's going to be something about, life was so much better in the 50s. I won't block that initially, but, like, I will have a conversation like, hi, no, not on this channel. Absolutely not. We are vintage style, not vintage values. Thank you so very much. If you are vintage values, you can see yourself right on out the exit. No, absolutely not. The rampant racism, you all had, conniptions if you shared a water fountain with someone who was not white. So just stop. There is literally no reason to bring those values into 2023, period, full stop. You can bring the fashions that are not racist, because if you believe that the values of the 50s and the subservience and the rampant racism and the rampant exclusion are what you want to live, get out. I don't have time for that.
It blows my mind then that there's people that conflate
they absolutely have mixed. It's not even that they mix style. It's that they've created this 1950s ideal. There is a reason that when you put 1950s in a title on YouTube, the video does better. Because people want that ideal. And then when people like me are rude and absolutely shatter that reality into a million little pieces by being perfectly chaotic in the year of our Lord 2023, they don't like that. Yeah, so there really are those people that they have conflated the idea of being happy or a time when they remember being happy, especially the boomers, like as children. You conflate that being happy with your parents in the 50s to everything in the 50s was perfect, let's go back there. And that is absolutely not something that's not a conclusion that should be drawn. That is not something that I tolerate on my channel. Absolutely not.
I wonder if they spoke even to their own mothers just how happy they really were in the 50s. Like, I'm sure bits of their life were great, but maybe bits of their life wasn't great. And
yeah.
You don't know
but
that.
But you also have to think about, like, how,
kid.
especially as a parent, like, how much do you want your child to be happy? You don't want them to know all of your woes. So I bet you I don't think their mothers were doing anything necessarily wrong by not sharing that with them.
Yeah. But I'm saying, like, if they did go back, what would the reality be if they could speak to their mum
if we had time, we had the Wayback Machine for real life.
Yeah. It's something that I've said this before on the podcast, but I sometimes teach sewing classes, and I used to teach a lot of beginner classes, and I used to like warm up the class and everyone get each other chatting by asking like, oh, you know, what inspired you to sign up or whatever. And so many of them responded like, well, my mum used to sew all our clothes. And obviously they have lovely memories of that and a nice association with that. And then I wonder, like, how happy were your mum about that? You know, like, did she really like doing literally all your clothes? Because at that time it was cheaper than going to the shops.
That's correct.
You know?
Yeah,
like,
that sure is.
I don't want to scratch that too much, but I don't think that it was like 100% of them would have been like, yeah, I loved it. Loved it when you grew out of all your stuff and had to start again. Loved that.
Yeah, no. My mom, thankfully, was very, very open with me. She was very open with me, and I love her so much for it, because she would be like, not when I was like really small, but as I got older, and I like, especially when I was doing like the costume stuff, I said, Mom, why did you make all those dresses for me all those years? You knew I was going to grow out of them. She was like, yeah, why do you think I only did the special occasion dresses? So you only had to wear it once, and then I could feel not so bad about the fact that you couldn't wear it next year, because I knew you weren't going to be able to wear it next year. I was like, oh, there it is.
Yeah. That's why I'm always like going to my daughter like, you've grown. Why are you I told you not to grow. What are you doing?
Yeah. Right? How dare you?
Yeah.
Yeah, my husband the other day was like, our daughter's sleeping where? I'm like, yep, growth spurt time.
Yeah.
He was like, but we just got clothes. I'm like, yeah, and she's gonna grow again, my guy. Like, that's what I did as a kid. Like, that's what you did as a kid. Like, get over it.
Yeah. My best mate remembers her mum making some clothes in the early 80s for her sister, and just hating it. And the second that mass manufactured clothes got cheaper, never touched that sewing machine again.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think it wasn't all a case of like, oh, well, everyone suddenly had to go out to, you know, a lot of women had to suddenly go out to work. I think a lot of women were like, good, mass-produced clothes is cheaper. Bye, sewing machine. Yeah. And that's fine.
Right. I don't ever want people to think like, oh, you have to sew vintage or you have to sew for your kid. No! My child wore a manufactured Halloween costume. Like, I can't even be bothered to make her like, I would rather make her a fun dress that she wears on the daily than I would a Halloween. I'm the exact opposite of my mother. Yeah, I would rather make you daily wear stuff than crap you only wear once.
Absolutely. I would rather make a pair of pants that literally no one else will see, but it will see a bajillion wears.
Yes.
Because I think that's more of a return on your investment than, like a Halloween costume. Yeah.
Yeah, like, so, like, I was like, my kid went out a mass-manufactured costume, but guess what? That costume is also going to get worn all the time in our house.
Yeah, and then you can pass it on to another child when she grows out of it. Yeah, cool. So, in terms of your own preferences, like, what are your favourite styles or eras to work with?
I still love the 40s and 50s. The 40s I'm in a little bit of a fight with my current body shape, so 50s is a bit nicer to me.
Explain that. What do you mean?
Body dysmorphia is a real thing, and I definitely have it. I envision myself as still having like the smaller waist that I did, which meant that the 40s dresses, like when they would lay the way that I think they should lay.
Okay.
And occasionally I will make a straight line 40s dress with like a really cool bow detail, and I put it on. I was like, wow, I hate every inch of this. Right. Cool. One thing I have to know for myself is I need to stay in the more fit and flare, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, I actually I'm starting to dig the tent look of the 1960s, which I did not ever think would be words coming out of my mouth.
Who are you? Who even are you?
Right? What happened? But I made one dress. I made recently this Halloween dress that had like this vintage cat print in the middle, and the sides were all black. And while the black was heinous because I had thrifted it, so I have no idea what was in it, the needle was like punching through the fabric, and it wasn't the needle's fault, it was the fabric. Because it went through the white perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But I've worn that like, oh, this is kind of cute. Crap, what is happening? So I in this giant hoard that I have acquired, there are some of these really glorious chiffons.
Right.
Yes, they're polyester, but they drape so nicely. And they're not dry rotted, which we love.
Yay, plastic.
Yeah, right? There's a purple floral one that I've been looking and leaning to, like, is this finally the time that I make the tent dress? Like the pattern from the 60s. Do I finally do it? I might.
Do it.
It's so pretty and so flowy. And I'm like, dang it, I might have to do it. But yeah, so I usually stay in the 40s and 50s, but I've been kind of leaning toward 50s. And now we're starting to nudge into the 60s just a little. I'm not going to go to the suit town. I literally don't put me in a suit. Absolutely not. If I'm making a suit, it's probably because I'm going to go stage manage again. Maybe I'll make a suit when I do that, but nah, suits aren't for me.
Right, cool. Do you ever encounter sewers who would love to sew with vintage materials, vintage items, but they feel that there are barriers to entry? Like, for example, one argument that I know you've addressed on your YouTube channel is that it's harder for larger sewers to find patterns in their sizing, for example.
Yeah. It's not just the larger pattern sizes that are harder. What I find the biggest barrier to entry that I hear is that I'm scared to tear the pattern.
Okay.
That is the biggest barrier to entry that I hear, right alongside with, well, but I have a pattern, I don't know what they're saying. So this is why I've started to say on my channel, one, vintage pattern tissue is thicker than you think it is. It is thicker than modern tissue. If you think of that sad, wimpy, icky tissue that you pull out of all the modern patterns, that ain't it.
Right.
The pattern tissue was thicker prior to, I want to say it started to change in the late 70s when they started to go to multi-line. When they started to go to multi-line, the tissue got thinner and crappier. But before that, I still, like, people are like, oh, you should trace your tissue. I don't do that.
That was going to be my next question.
I don't do that. I use the effing tissue. That's what it's for. Like, if you pattern weight it, what are you doing to it? Nothing. All you have to do is iron it and then iron it back. That's all you got to do. If you're like me and you're a weirdo and you still pin it, guess what? As long as your pattern isn't falling apart in the corners, you're fine. Like, that's really the only time that I trace things is I'm like, oh, this is actively falling apart. But if it's not actively falling apart, your tissue is more than likely fine and can be used over and over and over again.
I mean, unless you're planning on doing some alterations for fit or whatever, that might be.
Yeah. I know some people, I will not do alterations to a pattern tissue. I know there are other sewists that do, and please know that I am not throwing shade to them, but like every time I see them do it, I'm like, I die inside a little. But that's me. But I have literally watched people cut apart vintage patterns.
Oh, I can't see that. I can't see that.
And that's the thing. But the thing is, like, that's it. Like, yes, we are allowed to have our feelings about that. But at the end of the day, do I hop on my little high horse and hop in someone's comment section and go, you shouldn't be doing that? No! I keep my daggone opinions to myself. I say, hey, you might want to store that together so you don't lose all the pieces. If it's easier for your brain to just manipulate the pattern tissue, whatever. Okay. We can tell people what the best practices are. We can tell people you should trace the pattern before you use it. You should especially trace it if you're going to alter it. Don't write on it, things like that. But at the end of the day, guess what? It's theirs.
Yeah.
If you have that pattern...
Yeah, you can't be policing people.
Exactly. I'm not the pattern police here, kids. I'm not going to whoop outside your house if you cut it in half. Like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. You're busy. You haven't
right?
got time for that.
I've got other stuff to do. I have an entire garage full of vintage fabric that if I don't get it to new homes, it's just going to rot in my garage instead of in South Carolina. Like, yes, there are best practices. But I would say things like that are the biggest barriers. So,
right.
Finding the pattern in your size. I am trying to show folks on my channel that as long as it's close, you can make it work. Like, it doesn't need to be perfect. But I know a lot of people that I talk to are scared to start. And so that's why I do what I do on my channel. I have people like, why don't you show us more of the process? Why don't you show us the detail work? And I'm like, I am not a how-to channel. I need to say that to the back and the front. The only way I am a how-to channel is if you want to come occasionally learn about how to use a vintage sewing pattern, because I still do those on occasion. But I have a lot of those already back in the back that I don't feel the need to redo. And so I am here existing on Beyonce's internet to show people that it does not matter if you don't know what you're doing. It does not matter if that pattern isn't your size. It doesn't matter if you are mixing a vintage pattern with modern fabric and modern findings and using a modern machine. As long as you make the thing, that's all that matters. I don't care if you hot glue the bad boy together. Go for it. There's fabric glue now. Go for it. I want to be that safe place to be like, yep, if she can do it, I can do it. Because if she's that chaotic, maybe I'm not so bad.
Yeah.
So like, that's why I always show my mistakes. Always. I think there was only one video where I had made so many mistakes that I shut down. That I was like, I can't record anymore. But I still, even in the showcase, I still talked about all the stuff I did wrong. I just also admitted, I was like, I am so sorry. I got so overwhelmed that I stopped filming because I was angry and in my pajamas.
Oh, bless you. So should we expect to have to do more adjusting to vintage sewing patterns to get a good fit?
No more than you do modern patterns.
Okay.
Modern patterns also suck. So, you know.
Yeah, you've got just as much likelihood of happening to fit into the specific silhouette that brand has deemed average compared to another
and also
one.
has given you 4 extra inches of ease on every single, point of measurement. So, like, no.
Hello, Big Four.
Yeah, looking at you, Big Four. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, how many Big Four patterns did I make in the beginning? And every single one, too big. Before I realised that, I think I might size down.
Yeah.
But sizing down is quite scary, isn't it? Especially when you're beginning, like being like, okay.
Yeah, especially since the the sizing measurements on the back of your pattern from the Big Four have not changed since 1979.
I saw that video of yours. That was really interesting. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. That was really awesome. Okay, so what about the instructions? Like, do you think that generally to use a vintage pattern, there is more of an assumption of a level of sewing knowledge than the hand holding that you might get with some of the more modern ones?
Yes, absolutely yes. That is the only way that I will say there is a very large difference, and it is a beneficial difference. Now, was I salty at the beginning of my channel? Because I have some knowledge tucked away in the back of my brain from sitting in my mother's sewing room for years. And I assumed incorrectly that everyone has that knowledge. And so I made statements on a couple of my like vintage versus reproduction patterns where I would go real hard on the instructions. And people were like, what the hell? Like, we need that. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. You're right. That's on me. And that's the thing. That's why I love the people that do comment respectful things like that. We're not doing respectability politics here. But when they comment things that are actually helpful to me, no matter how it comes out of their mouth. Because there were some people that were not nice about how they said it, which is also valid. Like, it probably felt like a personal attack, which is not my intention. What I think would help folks is to have access to vintage sewing books. So that's why the other thing I like to say on my channel is like, when you have a 1950s pattern, you should have either a 40s, 50s, or 60s reference. You got 20 years. Or the 40s is going to be less detailed. The 40s is going to be more, 60s is going to be more detailed. But like, you need to have some kind of actual period reference, because they will be like, in the usual way, and be like, bro, what the F does that mean? So you're like flipping through your book, like, what does that mean in this step? So I have some that are available on like my Ko-Fi that are just for free. Like, I'll share pages from there. And then I do have like entire booklets that are absolutely out of print, are not in copyright, before people jump in your comments. They're like, that's copyrighted material. Yeah, it was in 1932. Guess what company is long dead and none of the rights were bought? Why? Because I checked. So like, I like to scan those really high quality so that people can like actually go print them out if they wanted to and feel like they have the original. A lot of those original books, again, fell into, I was used and used and used and used and used and used until I fell apart. Because it would sit out with your sewing machine. Sure. Every time you went to sew, like if you had a question, you go flip, 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 flip. So after 70, 80 years of that, guess what's going to fall apart there? Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, almost from a sustainability point of view as well. Because like, if you've got a volume that you can reference for every single project that you are going to encounter, that's going to mean that your pattern is cheaper, there's less paper in there.
Absolutely.
And so it's almost like having your own kind of sewing expert next to you.
Right. No, it really is. It really is. I have 2 that I go to all the time. One of them is actually a lot easier to find. It's the Sewing Skills by Singer. I like the 1950s because it's by Mary Brooks Pickens. Fantastic. She also did a whole volume in the 20s. 20s sewing isn't always my jam. So like, I don't normally do that one. But like her 50s one, I use that thing anytime there's like, in the usual way. I'm like, okay, Mary, what you got? What's the usual way? I don't effing know. Like, tell me.
In the usual way. That's so funny.
It literally happens, especially... I love New York patterns so much. New York is a company that went out of business in about the mid-1950s.
Yeah.
They were the worst for that. I love making their patterns, but they are the worst for complete in the usual way. Because the thing is like, you know how like you get like the small volumes of information in those instruction pack? Like there's like 4 pages, right? There's so much detail. The 1940s ones are 1 sheet, front-sided.
Wow.
That's it. So you need to be really paying attention to what you're freaking doing, or just not care and put it together however it goes. Those are the 2 options that you got.
Yeah. I made a vintage coat pattern. I think it was probably like mid to late 60s one a couple of years ago, and it was just like, it was like, now make bound buttonholes.
Yeah, exactly. They do that all the time. They're like, and now do this really super complicated thing. Yeah, it's like, what?
I mean, now I've got the internet. But...
Yeah. And before they had books.
Yeah. Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!